Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and recently I've been getting back into making models. Now, I used to do a lot of model making with my dad way back when I was younger. It was something we both enjoyed doing. He's a very technically minded guy, I'm a very artistically minded guy, and models were something that sort of bridged those two worlds. There's a technical aspect because you're constructing something, but there's an artistic aspect because you're also designing it. You know, paint, decals, things like that. As the years went by, we started to have less time to do that sort of thing, and we kind of fell out of doing it. But recently, we've decided to get back into it. And so I decided, now that I've got a YouTube channel, I may as well document some of my efforts. I mean, why not, right? For my first steps back into the realm of model making, I decided to go with this plastic alien model kit produced by Lindberg. It's a very, very simple model. Only has 9 very large pieces and doesn't call for a lot of different paint colors. I can make more complex models than this, and I have, but since it's been a while, I decided I would start with this guy because he's relatively simple, and that would be a good way to get my feet wet again. I didn't want to jump into a really complex one and maybe mess it up in ways that I could never fix and then get frustrated with myself and quit, you know? Besides, the box says it's for ages 8 and over, and I'm definitely over the age of 8. As you can tell, the box contains a little blurb about the Roswell crash, which clearly inspired the design of this alien, which is a classic Roswell alien gray type. It also contains a huge mistake, as it says the incident occurred on July 4th. This is not true. The debris, whatever it might have been from, was originally found by Mac Brazel on June 14th, and official press statements were made on July 8th. That being the initial statement that it was a flying disc that may have been recovered. We can debate what actually happened another day. I'm just pointing out that the box got the date wrong. So when you open the box, this is what you get. 2 trees with big, easy-to-see plastic pieces. 2 halves for the body, 2 halves for the arms, 2 halves for the head, and 1 part for the base. I was really careful getting them out because I didn't want to break them, obviously, though I have to say they were fairly sturdy considering how thin they are. The instructions themselves were pretty easy to follow. You glue each half of each piece together, and you assemble after that. So in whatever order you want, you put together the body, you put together each arm, and you put together the head. While I waited for those different parts to dry, I decided to get started on painting the base, since that didn't require any assembly. The instructions only call for 3 paint colors: gray, silver, and black. It doesn't really specify anything beyond that, and when you look at the box, the gray and the silver used on the alien itself are almost indistinguishable from each other, but the base is a decidedly darker gray. Now, I could have tried to replicate exactly what was on the box, but one thing I like about model making is that you can technically make it however you want. You can put your own personal touch to it. I mean, unless it's a movie replica and you really want to recreate it as accurate to the film as possible, then you might want to stay a little closer to what the details are. But for something like this, you can let your imagination fly a little. So I broke out the enamel paints, which is what we always use, and I decided to do something that wasn't in any of the bottles. I created a mixture of flat gray and flat green to make a sort of odd turf color. Something that could look like the ground, but wouldn't necessarily be familiar. It would have that sort of alien look to it. And I painted the whole thing, including inside the footprints. Now, normally, painting inside that area wouldn't have been a good idea because that's where the feet need to be glued down, and model paint can interfere with the glue. However, I checked ahead of time, and the feet do not rest flat in the footprints. So no matter what I did, you'd be able to see underneath the feet to a certain extent. So if I left them unpainted, it wouldn't look natural. So I decided to paint the footprints, and wherever the glue needed to be applied, I would scrape the paint off of there first. I then decided to try my hand at dry brushing, which I had never done before, by the way, to bring out the details on the terrain a little. For that I used a paint labeled wood. which is ironic because I'm bringing out the details in sand and rocks. Now, since this was my first time dry brushing, it didn't come out the most professional looking. It did glop in a few places, I think. But I did my best, and in order to try and obscure that a little bit, I then went back over it dry brushing with just plain old gray, just as lightly as I could. And this was the final result. I'm sure I could have done better, but considering it was a first attempt at dry brushing, I think this turned out fine. Once all the parts had dried, I decided my first task would be to glue the arms in place. And once the glue had set there, I would paint the body. And rather than hand brush that, I decided I would be quick about it and use spray paint. The body is supposed to look like a silver futuristic spacesuit, and I figured spray paint would lend itself better to making that effect. Only I didn't just go with silver, I went with full-on chrome. To support it, I stuck a pencil down the suit's neck hole, held him upside down, brought him outside and sprayed him. Now, the instructions did advise painting the hands in the same skin tone as the head, which I'm going to get to in a moment, but considering there's really no definition separating the hands from the rest of the arms, I decided to just leave them chrome too and make it look like he was wearing gloves. The head had a tiny little nub at the base of the neck, which doesn't actually attach to anything, but which did allow me to grip it by a clothespin and basically paint the whole thing holding it that way. I went with flat gray to make it look more like skin than the shinier body. Now, again, if you look at the box, they went with a very light gray. I decided not to go with a light gray because I felt if it was too light, it wouldn't really contrast enough with the suit. So, this is a darker gray alien. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. For the eyes, of course, gloss black. And I had to do this a couple of times to make sure that I covered up any overspill. Now, if you get really up close to the model, I'm sure you'll be able to tell that it's not perfect, but looking at it from middle distance even, it's pretty good. I don't think there's any spillover that's glaringly obvious. No streak of gray running into the black or streak of black running into the gray. I think that's about as good as I could have managed. I did attempt to use a little bit of black paint on a toothpick to define the nostrils and the lips, but that wound up looking absolutely terrible. I could not make it look good, and I decided to abandon that, and once the little bit of black paint I had applied had dried, I went over it again with gray to get rid of those details. After that, I used a little sandpaper Dremel to scrape away a little bit of paint on the base. Didn't have to scrape anything off the bottom of the feet because I didn't really spray that area. And once the body was secure on the base, I ran a toothpick with some glue on it around the inside of the collar and plopped the head in. That I had to do twice because the head just kind of sits in there. There's nothing it really clicks into. So I had to get the glue in just the right area. But, well, that was the finished result. And here it is, the finished alien. How is it as a model overall? Pretty good, I would say, considering it's very simple. I will say that unfortunately, it's not seamless. As I'm sure you can tell where the arms connect to the body or looking down the side, there are some gaps that just aren't filled. And unfortunately, that's because of how the model was manufactured. When I test fitted the pieces, those gaps were already there, and I just knew there was really no way that was ever going to change, no matter how tightly I pressed them together. So my hope was just that the chrome spray paint would obscure it somewhat, and it kinda does. It's not perfect, but it does the job, I suppose. Paint-wise, I think it came out looking pretty nice, and, well, like I said, it's not bad. And as far as how the glue set, as you can see, pretty sturdy. I'm not going to be throwing this around, certainly, but it came together nicely. A little flawed, but Still a fun model to make and a good way to get myself back into this process. What other models will I be making in the future? Oh, just you wait and see. But for now, I have this guy. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, then go down to the description to find links to follow us on DeviantArt, Patreon, and Twitter. While you're there, you'll also find the Amazon links for the original novels Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, and The Occult Mafia. 2 books I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.